Part 1 expanded approximately 700 words. Snow had swallowed the valley long before December came, and with it went the last scattered signs of the world Elena once knew. When she first arrived at the cabin, autumn leaves were still clinging to the birches, trembling in the soft wind like they were afraid of letting go. She had felt the same. But months had passed, and winter had erased everything: color, sound, warmth. The valley was a white, endless hush, and she lived inside it like a ghost who hadn't realized she was gone. Elena had chosen this silence. She told herself it was a decision made out of strength, not defeat. After the breakup, violent in its quiet way, the kind where two people moved around each other like shadows until one finally walked out, and after the job loss that followed too closely, she couldn't face the noise of the city anymore. She couldn't face people asking if she was alright, or pretending not to notice when she wasn't. So she drove until the roads narrowed to a single frost-bitten line, until the mountains rose around her like an embrace she didn't know she needed. Her small cabin stood at the edge of the frozen forest, half buried under the weight of snow that fell almost every day. It was old, creaking, stubborn, much like she felt. The windows were frosted white each morning, the water pump groaned, and the fire needed feeding constantly. But the cabin didn't ask anything of her except effort, and she could give that. Effort was the one thing she had left. Days blended together until weeks dissolved into routine. Elena chopped wood every morning, the axe hitting the block with a rhythm so steady it almost became a heartbeat. She hauled water from the pump, the cold biting her fingers through her gloves. She cooked simple meals: lentils, potatoes, soup. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. She patched her clothes, mended torn gloves, carried out tasks that demanded her body work even when her mind didn't want to. The routine kept her upright, even if she felt like she was hollowing out a little more with each passing day. Sometimes she talked to herself just to make sure her voice still worked. She'd murmur things like, "All right, next chore," or, "This stew needs more salt," and the sound would startle her, bouncing strange and thin around the wooden walls. Other times, she sat outside on the steps, listening for the distant howl of wolves, imagining she wasn't completely alone in this frozen place. But despite her stubbornness, winter nights could be cruel. The wind scraped against the windows like it was trying to claw its way inside. The cold seeped through the cracks, numbing her toes even near the fire. And when the storms rolled in, white, howling walls of snow, her chest tightened with a fear she didn't want to name. She reminded herself that she'd chosen this. That she didn't need anyone. That she preferred the cold to the chaos she left behind. Yet even she couldn't lie to herself forever. By midwinter, the isolation settled into her bones deeper than the frost. She woke some mornings and didn't speak until hours later. She avoided looking in the mirror because the reflection, pale, quiet, tired, didn't feel like her. She worked through every storm, every freezing morning, because stopping would mean feeling, and she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Then, one evening, as she stepped outside to bring in more firewood, she saw them. Tracks. Not animal. Not the zigzag scamper of rabbits or the wide drag of deer. Human tracks, large, heavy prints pressed deep into the snow, still sharp around the edges. Fresh. Fresh enough that her breath made a small cloud as she stared at them, heart thudding hard against her ribs. The tracks came from the tree line. Moved steadily, purposefully. Part 2 expanded approximately 700 words. Rowan didn't push the door open. He simply stood there, snow dusted across his shoulders, his breath rising in soft clouds around him. He looked like someone who existed half in the forest, half in the world of people, a man shaped by quiet places. His eyes were calm, steady, even as Elena held the iron poker like a weapon between them. He lifted his hands slightly in a peaceable gesture. "I don't want trouble," he said, voice low but clear. "Just passing through. Storm caught me farther up the ridge than I expected. I saw your smoke. Thought, maybe, you'd have water to spare." Elena hesitated. No stranger would risk walking in a storm like this without a reason. But there was honesty in his face. Not desperation, not threat, just a tired sort of endurance. A look she recognized too well. After a long pause, she stepped back. "Fine, just for a moment," he entered with the softness of someone who didn't want to disturb anything. He closed the door gently behind him, his boots dripping melting snow onto the floor. He didn't stare at her, didn't poke around the cabin with curious eyes. He moved toward the fire only when she nodded in permission. The heat hit him, and he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for miles. "I'm Rowan," he said. "If that matters." "Elena." He nodded once, like he was storing the name somewhere safe. As she handed him a tin cup of water, she studied him more closely. His coat was old but meticulously repaired, stitched in places she could tell he'd done himself. His hair was dark, a little too long, curling against his collar. His beard had the beginning of frost in it. He looked like a man who had carried silence on his shoulders for years. He drank carefully, as if savoring every sip. "Thank you." The storm outside raged for hours, drumming against the walls. Snow piled up in thick waves. Elena kept expecting Rowan to talk, to fill the silence with small talk or apologies, but he didn't. He only spoke when necessary. Which, strangely, made her less afraid. When the fire dimmed, he rose quietly and added wood without being asked. Not in a showy, overly helpful way, just a practical gesture, like he'd spent enough winters to know when a fire was starving. When he noticed the draft under her door, he crouched and inspected it, then patched the gap with a piece of cloth he pulled from his bag. "You don't have to do that," she said, more defensively than intended. "I know," he replied simply, and went on doing it. No pity, no assumptions, just help. Elena didn't remember the last time someone helped her without asking anything in return. As the night grew colder, she realized it was dangerous for him to leave. "You should stay until the storm dies down," she said reluctantly. "If you try to hike out now, you'll freeze." He nodded. "I figured as much." He settled on the floor near the fire, not the sofa. As if he didn't want to impose more than necessary. She offered him extra blankets, he accepted with a quiet thank you. They spoke in small pieces as the storm howled around them. She told him she'd come out here to reset, though she left out the heartbreak in the job. He didn't pry, didn't ask for details she didn't want to give. When she asked what he was doing hiking in winter, he shrugged. "I travel, usually alone, helps to quiet the mind." Somehow that made sense. Over the next few days, Rowan returned. The storm had passed, but he seemed to treat the valley like a place he wasn't ready to leave yet. Sometimes he brought small things, dried fruit, a handful of nuts, an extra spool of thread he'd found in an abandoned shed up the trail. Other times he simply showed up after checking the traps he'd set deeper in the woods. He worked without being asked. If the firewood stack was low, he chopped more. If the roof groaned under fresh snow, he climbed up and brushed it off. When her lantern flickered erratically for the fifth night, he fixed it with patient, practiced fingers. He didn't hover, didn't crowd her, he simply fit into the spaces she'd left empty. Elena found herself waiting, against her will, for the familiar sound of his footsteps crunching across the snow. She found herself glancing out the window when the sun dipped behind the ridge, wondering if he'd appear, carrying that quiet warmth like a second coat. Winter's grip slowly loosened. The days stretched longer, and the ice that had gripped the edges of the valley began to melt into trickling streams. Even the stubborn frost on her cabin's roof started to glisten rather than cling. Elena noticed small changes around her that went almost unnoticed in the depths of the previous months, the hint of green beneath the snow, the song of a crow somewhere in the distance, the way the wind had begun to carry the scent of damp earth rather than frozen pine. And alongside the world's awakening, she felt a change in herself. Rowan remained a constant presence through these early hints of spring. He continued to arrive quietly, sometimes helping with chores that had become increasingly complex as the snow melted. He mended the fence along the perimeter of her property, reinforced the old roof, and helped clear the debris the thaw revealed. He didn't rush her or expect anything. His patience was a balm to the tight coil of tension she had carried for so long. There were mornings when she would wake to find him already at work outside, moving with the steady rhythm of someone accustomed to being part of the land. Sometimes she would watch from her doorway, coffee warming her hands, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Other mornings, he would simply appear beside her, ready to walk through the woods or check the traps he had set. He never forced conversation, never intruded. And yet, the moments they shared felt heavy with unspoken understanding, as though each silence was as meaningful as words. But life outside the cabin reminded her that Rowan, too, was human and vulnerable. One morning, he didn't come. Nor the next day. Panic knotted in her stomach like a living thing. She tried to focus on her tasks, chopping wood, repairing fences, tending to the cabin, but her hands trembled too much to hold the axe. She found herself peering down the familiar trails, imagining every possible misfortune. The fear of losing him before she truly realized what he meant to her was overwhelming. Finally, unable to bear it, she wrapped herself in her heaviest coat, grabbed a sturdy walking stick, and ventured out onto the trail. The early spring snow was slick in places, and her boots sank into thawing patches, but she pressed forward, following the path Rowan usually took. After hours of searching, she found him slumped against a fallen pine tree, his leg twisted awkwardly beneath him. The sight made her heart seize. "Rowan," she called, rushing forward. He tried to wave her off, to brush it off with a weak smile, but Elena saw the strain etched into his face. Without hesitation, she wrapped an arm around his shoulders and helped him stand, leaning on her for support as they made their slow, careful way back to the cabin. Inside, she tended to his injury as he winced with each movement. She boiled water, bandaged the sprain with practiced care, and forced him to rest. Rowan, who had been her savior in countless small ways, now became the one she could care for. The cabin, once a place of isolation, now felt alive with the rhythm of shared work, concern, and the warmth of human touch. That night, she sat beside him, hands gently checking his leg, voice steady. Despite her racing heart, "You don't have to walk away when the snow melts," she whispered. Rowan looked at her with a calm that masked his exhaustion, and for the first time, Elena saw the vulnerability behind his quiet strength. "I wasn't planning to," he murmured. His words were simple, but they carried a weight she had never imagined. Outside, the last frost of winter dripped from the cabin's eaves, falling into the thawing earth that would soon blossom with spring. Inside, the two of them were enveloped in a warmth far more potent than the fire crackling between them. The isolation, the cold, the endless monotony of survival, all of it had faded in the presence of mutual trust and care. Days passed, and the world outside the cabin continued to bloom. Streams ran clearer, the forest awoke in delicate green shoots, and sunlight stretched across the valley with a promise of renewal. Elena and Rowan worked side by side, their connection deepening not through grand gestures but through quiet, shared moments, gathering firewood, repairing fences, laughing softly at small missteps, and finding comfort in simple meals prepared together. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, they sat on the cabin steps, hands brushing occasionally, neither needing to speak. The warmth between them wasn't rushed, didn't demand anything, it simply existed, steady as the rhythm of life returning to the valley. Elena realized she had been buried in winter not just outside, but inside herself. Rowan had coaxed her out of the frozen stillness without forcing her, without questioning her scars, without pity. He had returned her to life, piece by piece, step by careful step.